It very much seems as though the writers have saved the worst for last. Let's get this over with. Just before we dive into the thrilling finale of Season 2 of Rings of Power, I will quickly remind you where we left each plotline the last time we saw them. In Eregion, Galadriel has just been told to save as many people as she can, and to take the Rings for Men as far from Sauron as possible. Celebrimbor has just revealed to Sauron that the rings are outside of his reach. The orcs have also just broken into the city, and Adar has taken Galadriel's ring from Elrond. In Khazad-dûm, Durin called the army back because his father decided to murder his own people and dig a diggy hole directly to the Balrog's doorstep. In Pelargir, Isildur and Theo went back home after being abducted by a tree. Estrid and her fiancé either went with them or stayed in the woods. In Númenor, Miriel survived the trial by Abyss, which has presumably jeopardized Pharazôn's kingship. And finally, in Rhûn, not Gandalf had to choose between getting a magic stick and saving his friends, while Nori and Poppy await the inevitable attack from Skeletor and Rasputin. We open up in Khazad-dûm. Durin and Na'vi head to the Mithril mine, and Disa tells her husband that the ring has made the king turn into a psychopath.
It's the ring! It has him!
This means that I was slightly wrong in my assessment in Part 7, as this reveals that Na'vi did not actually go to the king, it was the other way around. Na'vi and his men were guarding the mine with Disa while Durin assembled the army. The king then remembered that, oh yeah, there's Mithril down there, and he decided to attack his own kin in order to access the mine. He killed and or badly injured Na'vi's men because they were not given plot armor by the writers. Na'vi was injured but seems fine, and Disa appears to have escaped entirely unscathed. As for what actually happened when the king confronted Disa during a Mithril-fueled rampage, we can't even begin to speculate. No doubt the writers don't know either, because Disa doesn't give Durin any kind of hint as to what happened. She is fine, because this confrontation happened off-screen. The only thing I can conclude is that Disa did not physically block the king from entering, otherwise she would also be dead. Durin then tells his wife not to follow him into the mine, no matter what she hears. And then they kiss. Okay, so this would have been a perfectly adequate scene, possibly even reaching the astonishing heights of good, if the pieces required to make this scene happen were not made of piss. Durin telling his wife to take the miners to safety before kissing her possibly for the last time, and suggesting, without explicitly saying, that either he or his father or both of them may well be about to die, is the rare example of Rings of Power breaking its fifth rule. In this scene, Durin does not say exactly what he is thinking, but what he is thinking is implied and conveyed by the dialogue he delivers. This is typically how writing works, and because the writers of Rings of Power don't appear to know how writing works, this makes this one of the best written scenes in Rings of Power. Durin doesn't say, I might have to kill my dad or he might kill me, who knows, but either way something bad is about to happen. He instead communicates to her that he doesn't want her to witness whatever is about to happen, and he of course wants her to not put herself in danger. Down in the depths of the mountain, King Durin is digging a diggy hole. If you recall, he wants Mithril so that he can make weapons and armor to sell for an extortionate rate to the elves who are currently being besieged. And rather than play the long game of being a functional leader who has the support of his people, many of whom are miners and can mine rather a lot of Mithril if they have reason to do so, he has instead decided to kill his own people and get to mining himself. This means the ring has indeed driven him completely mad. So mad that he will go about achieving his nonsensical goal in a highly inefficient and counterproductive manner, but we should expect nothing less at this point. This manner is necessary for Rings of Power to hit its preordained emotional beats. During this sequence, we see that the Balrog is totally awake and shit, which means that, yes, the dwarves had basically already dug all the way to the Balrog, as there is only this single thin wall of cave separating them. This was absolutely not the case back in Season 1, as the Mithril mine was very small by comparison. The king did not lift his restrictions and begin excavating further into the mountain until Episode 5 of Season 2, which means the dwarves of Khazad-dûm delved too greedily and too deep, entirely in between Episodes 5 and 6. They excavated all the way down to the Balrog, seemingly in a day or two. Anyway, Durin confronts his father and immediately demands that he take the fucking ring off. If the characters in Rings of Power were allowed to have conversations rather than exposition exchanges, then Durin should know that the ring is not actually the problem, or at least it is not the entire problem. The king has acted in a comprehensively crazy and irrational manner even when not wearing the ring. So if he were to take it off, he would be like, yep, still crazy, and then put it back on. The king ignores Durin, and so Durin threatens to remove his father's hand, prompting the king to question whether Durin is strong enough to turn his axe on his own father. This is remarkably rational behavior from one so crazy as him. This is also an example of a character in Rings of Power knowing and understanding what another character's values are, and exploiting a perceived weakness. Far more often than not, characters in Rings of Power will simply talk past each other and say what the writers want them to say, rather than responding to what the other characters are actually saying. It makes complete sense for the king to know that his son is not actually willing to follow through on this threat, but this seemingly logical and calculating act is entirely out of place given the king's recent behavior. Which means this is an example of the writers of Rings of Power remembering that their characters are supposed to have internal thoughts and a history of past interactions with the other characters, but because of the comical and absurd manner in which they have depicted King Durin in Season 2, this is almost entirely unbelievable. In an attempt to reason with his father, Durin begins to reminisce about that one time when he was a wee lad. He says that they used to arm wrestle, that the king would let Durin lift his hand to make Durin think he could win, before slamming his hand down again. That was when Durin knew that nothing was stronger than his father. We almost had something. This was almost good. And I mean, it isn't bad as it is, but it's also 2 lines of dialogue, which I guess is the best we are going to get from this fucking show. A vague mention of how King Durin raised his son. This does make me wonder, however, why is Durin appealing to the king's physical strength rather than his mental fortitude? We already know that greed is not his way, so potentially a story about that one time when the king personally gave a load of gold to a family of dwarves who had recently hit hard times, thereby showing the king's skill as a leader. His caring personality and his generosity may have been more appropriate because this would relate specifically to King Durin's current actions. It would highlight how drastically his personality has shifted in the last few days. However, because the king is, for now at least, fucking bonkers, he replies that a dwarf should never beg, and he punches a hole in the wall. Unfortunately, this was the last wall in the mine, which means it's Balrog time. Additionally, Durin's reaction is no! Which means Durin somehow knew that his father would break through this wall in only one hit. And you may be thinking, well, come on, isn't that a bit of a nitpick? And I'm sorry, no, it fucking isn't, because if it took more than one hit to break through the wall, then Durin could have stopped his father. Or, at the very least, the conversation would continue in one direction or another. The writers don't cut the conversation short via their usual method of being like, suddenly Numenor. They instead cut the conversation short by having the wall only need one more hit to punch through by the time Durin arrives at the bottom of the mine. So, the mountain is full of mithril, and the king tells his son, "We're rich! We're rich! We're rich!" He says that to see the mountain the way that he does, you have to wear a ring. Not any specific ring, just a ring. It is apparently an established property of rings in Middle-earth that they give you a real-time 3D map of rock and stone. What King Durin should have said here is that this ring allows him to see the mountain properly, and that therefore he will not take the fucking ring off. Not that to see the mountain, one must wear a ring.
It's not our mountain, Father. You taught me that.
With these rings, it could be.
So what exactly does Durin mean when he says that his father taught him that the mountain is not theirs? He can't have meant that the mountain belongs to all dwarves, or at least all inhabitants of Khazad-dûm, because this would mean that the king's reply means, actually, our people can go fuck themselves, this mithril is ours specifically. Maybe this is what he now thinks, but it would make zero sense for him to say this to Durin. The problem is that the only other option I can think of is that when the king previously taught Durin that the mountain isn't theirs, he was referring to a certain creature that lives in the depths of the mountain. But we have had no indication that either of the Durins knew about the Balrog prior to Disa screaming at it in an attempt to find her large spherical object. So I honestly have no idea what we are meant to conclude here, but I guess I will lean in the direction of King Durin being like, my people can go fuck themselves, this mountain is ours, when previously he was like, yeah, the mountain kind of belongs to everyone. Anyway, now the Balrog is about to show up and kill King Durin. This serves as the ultimate consequence for the king's insanity, as well as Durin's inability to do what needed to be done. If you recall, the Balrog is indeed the thing from the other thing, and everyone laughed and clapped when they saw the Balrog in Season 1, so now it is time for the writers to double down on taking things that aren't theirs and raping them for nostalgia. Gandalf is of course dragged by the Balrog into the depths of the mountain, and the way the Balrog does this is by throwing its whip up from out of the darkness and grabbing onto his leg. So, naturally, the Balrog throws its whip up from out of the darkness and grabs onto King Durin's leg. The reason why the Balrog did this in the Fellowship of the Ring was because Gandalf had just destroyed the bridge and it was falling down the chasm, but it wanted to bring Gandalf with it. The reason why the Balrog does this in Rings of Power is because the Balrog has seen the Fellowship of the Ring, and it knew that it needed to do this for maximum fan service. So, the Balrog attacks the king. Durin attempts to save his father, but fails. The king somehow survives this, even though the force of this blow sends Durin flying. And then, because the Balrog revealed itself but didn't immediately swallow King Durin whole, the king is given the opportunity to have one last chat with his son. Seeing the Balrog has evidently made King Durin decide to stop being a greedy retard. The writers utterly annihilated this character. They turned him into a gold-addicted moron who murders his own people when they don't do what he tells them, but actually he's okay now because he knows he is about to die. The king finally removes the ring and says goodbye to his son. He explains that he never let Durin lift his hand when they used to arm wrestle. This was in fact just Durin getting stronger. This means that not only did Durin appeal to his father's physical strength when his physical strength was not in question, but the king has now flipped this back onto his son and said, "Hey son, you have always been really fucking strong," even though Durin was demonstrably not strong enough to stop him. That said, with a couple of tweaks, this would have been a semi-functional callback if it was a callback to something that was set up more than 2 minutes earlier. The reason why this kind of thing matters is because it helps to make a story, a setting, and the characters within it feel like they are real people with real relationships, which then makes the story more convincing, more believable, and more engaging. If the idea that Durin and his father used to arm wrestle was set up back in Season 1, then this would reward the viewer for paying attention, and this would potentially be a detail that would be better appreciated on repeat viewings. Their relationship would also be more believable, because maybe they discuss Durin's childhood in a different context, thereby showing the audience that they do have an established past. Instead, Durin and his father begin talking about a moment from Durin's childhood seconds before this moment is used as an emotional payoff. The writers have decided to set this up, and then less than 2 minutes later, pay it off, which gives the impression that they are making this shit up as they go. Nothing is reintegrated or reincorporated, and everything necessary to advance either plot, character, or theme is introduced right when it is needed, which is a large part of why Rings of Power is one of the most contrived stories I have ever seen. Anyway, seeing the Balrog has evidently made the king stop being fucking bonkers, because he does not just charge at the Balrog like, "Oi, get the fuck away from my mithril!" He appears to come to his senses, and he asks his son for forgiveness before doing so. Which means, if the Balrog didn't attack in the way that it did, this juicy emotional goodbye could not have happened in the way that the writers wanted. This isn't just nonsensical fan service. The writers needed the Balrog to act in this very specific manner for us to hit certain emotional beats before the inevitable happens. King Durin needs to say an earnest goodbye to his son, which requires that he is no longer fucking bonkers, which requires that the Balrog reveal itself in a dramatic manner, but also that the king doesn't die immediately. Therefore, the writers had the Balrog do the whip thing from the other thing so as to reveal itself, then just kind of wait for the dialogue scene to happen before attacking the king. Also, this is entirely unclear. Does the Balrog want the ring? Did Sauron make the dwarven rings to be Balrog magnets? Is the Balrog just really angry that the king woke him up? I can't answer any of this, but this does confirm that Sauron has entirely hindered his ability to get mithril, which actually I guess doesn't really matter anymore because Celebrimbor was able to make the rings for men using goo whilst inside of a temporal prison, and so Sauron wasn't taking any kind of risk regarding the Balrog because he just kind of knew exactly what was going to happen. Also, why exactly does King Durin attack the Balrog? Is he still insane? Does he think he can kill it? Does he want to die? What ends up happening is that attacking the Balrog causes a cave-in, and thereby saves both his son and his kingdom, at least temporarily, but he can't have known that this was going to happen. What seems to happen is that he goes insane, then accidentally finds the Balrog, realizes, oh shit, whoops, my bad, and then he leaps to his death because he doesn't want to deal with the fallout, which is obviously not what was intended, but I don't have a better answer. This shot here started off looking pretty okay, a tiny dwarf facing down this colossal being of pure evil, but then they make him do this hilarious little jump, and the Balrog also appears to move substantially quicker than the king, which is either an error in visual effects, or this is confirmation that the Balrog just moves incredibly quickly. As this happens, Durin attempts to stop his father, but Disa holds him back because she is also here. Disa showed up precisely when she meant to, which means either that she was kind of watching for a while, or she arrived just in time to save her husband. This also tells us that she didn't listen to her husband, and she has put herself in danger, something that both characters should absolutely not have wanted, because, again, they have children, and they have a responsibility to look after them. But it turns out that Disa not listening and putting herself in danger is actually a good thing, because this scene suggests that Durin would have died. At this point, Durin has not taken his father's ring. Later in the episode, it turns out that Durin grabbed it and it survived the cave-in. I do not believe that Durin would retrieve the ring because it destroyed his father. But apparently, not only did he choose to recover the ring, but he was also able to do so because it somehow survived the cave-in. So, the Balrog has just killed the king. Durin and Disa and 2 other dwarves are standing right here, but the next thing that happens is that all of these words start appearing on the screen, which is actually the most coherent part of Rings of Power. I guess having all of these words appear must be of utmost importance to the plot. Maybe this is an abstract representation of the Valar watching from above and considering if they should intervene, because it can't possibly be that this is just the opening credits to a TV show, and that the writers have decided to cut away and not show us what the fuck happened to Durin and Disa, because it is entirely unclear from this scene whether or not the Balrog can follow them, but don't worry, the Balrog is not seen or mentioned again in the rest of the episode. Okay, King Durin stops being crazy because, a Balrog unalives himself because, whoops, thinks Durin is really strong even though he isn't. Disa doesn't fucking listen, is willing to maybe orphan her children to save her husband. And Durin is not strong enough to stop his father and takes the ring even though fucking no, don't do that. Cut to Rune. Not Gandalf has abandoned his training and has arrived at the Stor's village. How he knew where this village was, I have no idea. This is not explained at any point in the episode, so I can only conclude that he had another convenient vision, off-screen, that told him where to go. One of Skeletor's horses is outside, the village is abandoned, and it appears that not Gandalf is too late, because Rasputin is already here. This should mean that the Stores and Nori and Poppy are all dead, which means I cannot wait for Rings of Power to explain why none of these characters are dead. Also, this is the rare moment where I am thankful that something important has happened off-screen. We have skipped past everything that happened in the Stores village, but the reason why I'm thankful is not because this is better storytelling, it is because I could not fucking care less about the Stores and their village. Anyway, Rasputin tells not Gandalf that Manwë said he would come. Rasputin then repeatedly calls not Gandalf old friend, which I am going to take as confirmation that this character is indeed Saruman. Or at least I am going to take this as confirmation that the writers want me to think that this character is Saruman. Time will only tell how many episodes of bullshit we will have to sit through while they cock-tease Saruman's name for absolutely no reason. Rasputin explains that he and not Gandalf are kin, that there are 5 of them in total, and that not Gandalf convinced them to leave the uttermost west for this world, knowing that none of them can defeat Sauron alone. This is suggesting that not Gandalf wanted all of the Istari to be in Middle-earth to defeat Sauron, which would then logically lead me to believe that the uttermost west is Valinor, which then tells us that the Istari originally lived with the elves in some form. This also means, if Rasputin is being truthful, that not Gandalf existed prior to the events of Season 1, and so how and why he returned in the form of a meteor is a question that will not be answered until the writers come up with a way to answer it. Not Gandalf then adheres to rule number 5, and he says exactly what he is thinking.
But I was told you wished to ally yourself with Sauron.
Wow, that's really insensitive.
To be clear, he was informed by Tombaloid that Rasputin is evil, and yet Rasputin has shown up claiming to be not Gandalf's ally. He could make a play to get more information. He could play dumb and ask who Sauron is, ask who the Androgenites were, or even just be like, I've been tracking the footsteps of 2 young hobbits. Have you seen them? But instead he says, oh, but I've been reliably informed that you aren't a goodie. You are a baddie. What do you have to say about that? He just immediately reveals the exact fucking information that he is working with, leaving him absolutely no room to maneuver around an opponent that he has every reason to believe at this point is incredibly powerful and dangerous. Rasputin ignores the question and says that if not Gandalf follows him, he shall receive the answers he seeks: his past, his name, and his staff. So far, Rasputin and Tombaloid have each attempted to convince Not Gandalf to help them. In favor of Team Tombaloid, he gave Not Gandalf a bath and fed him, and he claimed that the Skelebobs were working for Rasputin. However, he demonstrably did not care about the Harfoots, and he was a condescending twat. In favor of Team Rasputin, he has been open with Not Gandalf, he appears to know about his past, and he has offered to answer any questions he may have. He has also claimed that the Harfoots are safe. Point being, if you place yourselves in Not Gandalf's shoes, you are going to side with Rasputin every single time, which is absolutely not what the writers want us to think. They are working under the assumption that Not Gandalf knows everything we know, which is not the case. I am not saying that Rasputin is acting in an entirely trustworthy manner, because he is not. He is standing in the middle of what appears to be an abandoned or destroyed village, and he also appears to have been waiting for Not Gandalf for unexplained reasons. However, when compared to Tombaloid, Rasputin absolutely appears to be more trustworthy, more caring, and, frankly, less of an irritating shithouse. Anyway, then this happens.
Poppy! Nori!
It turns out that there is dissent in the ranks of evil. Rasputin insists that the Harfoots are not to be harmed, but Skeletor replies that they won't be once Rasputin delivers on his promise to heal the curse upon their flesh. No, I didn't accidentally mix that up. That is literally what is said. This is broken dialogue. Skeletor is saying that once Rasputin holds up his end of the deal, the Harfoots won't be harmed. Which, that's not how harm works. They have either been harmed or they have not. And what Rasputin does doesn't change that. If we take this sentence entirely literally and we interpret the words as meaning what they actually fucking mean, Skeletor is saying that the Harfoots won't have been harmed anymore once Rasputin heals them, when what he should have said is, hold up your end of the deal now, or else I will harm them. Anyway, now that the scene has devolved into something approximating a Mexican standoff, we have to do exactly what the writers are hoping we do not do. We must consider what each character wants. Not Gandalf wants to rescue the Harfoots, and he ideally wants answers from either Rasputin or from Tombaloid. Rasputin wants to trick Not Gandalf into coming with him. Skeletor wants Rasputin to heal the curse upon his flesh, and he doesn't particularly care about either Not Gandalf, Rasputin, or the Harfoots. Skeletor made a deal with Rasputin that he would capture Not Gandalf in exchange for Rasputin healing him. By the time we reached episode 4, the plan was that he would grab the Harfoots and Rasputin would presumably heal him in return. Why they needed to do anything with the Harfoots is unclear, as they knew by this point that they had been separated from Not Gandalf, and so leveraging the Harfoots to get Not Gandalf to surrender is not something that would have been necessary. Anyway, Skeletor failed to do this, and he went to Rasputin to ask for help. They both returned to the store village, a bunch of off-screen happened, and they each achieved their respective goals. They have both the Harfoots and Not Gandalf. Skeletor has, however, decided to ruin Rasputin's evil plan by threatening to kill the Harfoots if he doesn't heal them right this fucking second. What Skeletor needed to do is keep the Harfoots away from Rasputin and Not Gandalf, and to later ask if Rasputin will still heal him, as even though Skeletor failed his mission, Rasputin did actually get what he wanted. If Skeletor believed that he had failed and wasn't going to get what he was promised, then yeah, this may understandably prompt him to take action and demand that Rasputin heals him, but the way that he goes about this is utter fucking nonsense. Because in revealing that Nori and Poppy are here and in threatening to kill them, he has ruined Rasputin's manipulation of Not Gandalf and thereby ensured that Rasputin will never heal him. He will instead snap his fingers and replace Skeletor's blood with acid. From Rasputin's perspective, however, this is even fucking funnier, because his underling has just presented him with the perfect opportunity to trick Not Gandalf, which I will get to momentarily. Skeletor gets angry at the suggestion that he and his Skelebobs are low company, and he says that his people were once kings. Which, if true, means that this merry band of lepers were all the kings of something? An empty desert? Where are their respective kingdoms? Did they stop being kings and become lepers in the last 20 to 30 years? How old are they? What is wrong with their skin? Before we have time to consider the implications of this line, Rasputin zaps Skeletor into a wall, and his skull is skewered by the whims of the writers. Well, that's it for Skeletor, I guess. None of the above questions will be answered. He was indeed just a plot device who was both competent and incompetent as dictated by the powers that be. Rather amusingly, Rasputin didn't do anything to the Celebrimbor who was holding a knife on the Harfoots, when what he should have done is zapped both of them, but he was instead very reckless and very lucky, because had this Celebrimbor killed the Harfoots, then this, again, ruins his evil plan. Anyway, Rasputin has just rescued Nori and Poppy, thereby cementing himself as being on not Gandalf's side, because luckily Skeletor was like, heal me immediately. It turns out that all of the stores are totally alive and shit, because Gundabale walks out and is like, holy fuck, it's the Dark Wizard! Rasputin then explains that he was referred to as a Dark Wizard by ignorant men who feared him for his magical abilities, but that he hopes his actions in saving the Harfoots will lead them to know better of him. Again, I have to question what the fuck happened off screen. Skeletor went back to Rasputin and said, we might have found the Harfoots in the store's village. Skeletor and Rasputin then went back to the village. Skeletor and his Skelebobs went into the village and managed to find Nori and Poppy through unspecified means, and also ensured that all of the stores remained off screen until they had lines to say. Rasputin, meanwhile, remained completely hidden until not Gandalf's arrival, which he didn't know was going to fucking happen. Yes, he wanted to use the Harfoots as leverage to capture not Gandalf, but he had no way of knowing that not Gandalf was going to travel to the store's village. Additionally, this means that Rasputin remained entirely hidden from the stores for the duration, because if Rasputin was part of the initial off-screen attack on the village, then Gundabale would immediately be like, Poppy then questions Rasputin and says it was wrong to kill Skeletor, and that killing Skeletor does not clear him of being evil. Rasputin responds,
You pity him whose blade was at your throat.
Which is not actually what happened. It was a different Celebrimbor who had the knife to Poppy's throat, and in a better show than this, I would perhaps grant the benefit of the doubt and say, well, yeah, you could say that through a degree of separation, it was Skeletor who was threatening to kill Poppy, but in Rings of Power, I can't do that, because Rings of Power makes these mistakes all the fucking time. Also, what exactly do the Harfoots think Rasputin should have done? Well, I'm glad you asked. Moving on. Rasputin continues.
Pity will not defeat Sauron.
Not Gandalf then questions whether Rasputin wants to defeat Sauron or succeed him, and I have no idea why they are all super suspicious of this guy because he just saved them. Rasputin then says,
Together we can rule the galaxy.
We will both be his successors.
What the fuck?
So he just came straight out like, yes, I'm evil, you should join me, it will be really cool and shit. He has stopped pretending, which means that the writers of Rings of Power have, for the third time, had a villain come straight out and admit that, yeah, they are actually a villain, when there were a multitude of other options available. Not Gandalf refuses this offer because, as he told us in Season 1,
I'm good.
And Rasputin then starts destroying the village. Making me fucking wonder. Why do you not maybe accept and go with Rasputin if for no other reason than to get him away from the halflings? If you genuinely do not trust this guy and you suspect him of being evil, then why would you openly defy him whilst surrounded by a village of innocent civilians? Well, this is hopefully a question that we can all answer collectively at this point, 16 episodes into Rings of Power. The reason is because the writers want Rasputin to start destroying the village so that we can have character drama. Rasputin then delivers one of the funniest lines in the entire series, which is unfortunately too long for me to play for you. He says, I only hope losing those you care for most will give you a taste of the suffering all Middle-earth will know should Sauron prove victorious. Rasputin is still seemingly trying to convince not Gandalf to stand with him against Sauron because he claims that Sauron will inflict suffering upon the entire continent, and so, naturally, he decides to level an entire village. He says, I am going to murder all of your friends to prove how evil someone else is. And he does all of this moments after saying, hey, yeah, we should totally replace Sauron, by the way. This character has barely received any development, but he is already entirely broken. He is seemingly pure evil, but instead of concealing his evil so as to manipulate, as he was doing 10 fucking seconds earlier, he instead knowingly does evil things and says, look, this proves that actually this other guy is evil. He then freezes not Gandalf in place and says,
When your senses have returned, I will be waiting.
Before leaving the village and squashing everyone with rocks. Not Gandalf holds the rocks just long enough for the named characters to escape, and we cut away. Okay, Rasputin is not Saruman, is very evil and doesn't hide it, is terrible at manipulation, and knows things he can't know. Not Gandalf, also knows things he can't know, and is also an idiot, because he says no to this fucking evil bellend who's about to level a village. Poppy doesn't think Rasputin should have saved her life. And this also applies to Nori. Skeletor used to be a king, and also is retarded. Back in Numenor, Aarion has been ordered to gather the leaders of the faithful on behalf of Pharazôn. Because Aarion is a fucking idiot, she has continued to work for Pharazôn even though Pharazôn just tried to execute her father. Because the leaders of the faithful are fucking idiots, they have all agreed to this summon even though Pharazôn and his son are seemingly willing to arbitrarily kill them. Pharazôn arrives and informs them.
We have learned why Miriel was able to bewitch the sea. It would seem she has an ally of cunning power. An ally who has already bruised Numenor once, and is now gathering strength to make us bleed.
I'm not quite sure how to say this, so I'm just going to say it and then I'll backtrack with all my questions, because when this happened, I was expecting that this would be elaborated on during the episode, but of course, this is Rings of Power, we get zero elaboration. Pharazôn says that Miriel has been working with Sauron, and that this is how she was able to survive the trial by Abyss. This is obviously false, so why does Pharazôn believe that Miriel is working with Sauron? This is incredibly poorly explained, but we do have a couple of bits to work with. Pharazôn saw Halbrand in his Palantir vision back in episode 6, and he has somehow made the connection that Halbrand and Sauron are the same person. Because he has made this connection, he now believes that Miriel has been collaborating with Sauron because Miriel rode to war with Halbrand back in Season 1. Which means the writers once again injected information into the character's brain so that they could steer the story in the direction they wanted. Except this time, they didn't inject all of the information, which means that the audience now has to work out how Pharazôn worked out that Halbrand is Sauron. Anyway, Pharazôn gives this document to the High Priest, who says,
Sauron?
This High Priest has recently been accosted by the Kingsmen. They presumably destroyed his shrine, and they murdered Afroc. And he has just been given a document saying, "My political opponent is working with Satan, I promise." And he is not allowed to question this. We, of course, don't get to read this document because the writers don't know or care what it actually says. For narrative purposes, it simply says Miriel plus Sauron. At no point does any character question how the fuck Pharazôn can possibly know this. And the reason no one questions this is because he used this ancient elven relic, and the writers don't yet want him to admit that he has been using the very device that he decried Miriel for using earlier. Because Miriel was working with Sauron, Lord Buggernuts declares that all members of the faithful are traitors. The soldiers then go from door to door, gathering up all of the faithful. I am unsure how they know which ones are faithful, there doesn't appear to be a list or anything, and the characters appear to treat this as though when you see a faithful, they are instantly recognizable. Aarion seems to finally come to the realization that she is batting for the wrong team, and she sneaks off. Aarion runs through the streets to find Elendil. This part of the city is notably unoppressed, which means she has both outrun the Kingsmen, and she managed to get here before Elendil discovered what Pharazôn had done. Elendil's reaction to his daughter's presence is exactly what you might expect, because this silly bint just seems to wander around Numenor ruining everything. She then warns Elendil that they are coming for him. Aarion has seemingly decided,
Actually, yeah, I'm not okay with the rather dictatory manner in which Pharazôn is running things. Also, one of my oldest friends disappeared recently, but no time for that now. This Pharazôn guy wanted to kill my father, and even though I was totally cool with him doing that previously, I'm not okay with it this time. This calls for treason.
We don't know or understand why Aarion has had a change of heart, primarily because we don't understand why she was on Team Pharazôn to begin with. I also have no idea how the Kingsmen operate and why all of these soldiers are suddenly on Team Pharazôn, even though they spent years or decades serving Miriel and her father previously. But it turns out that no, all of the guards are just evil robots who do what Pharazôn tells them, and the question as to whether or not any of them had any degree of sympathy for Miriel, or were straight up members of the faithful themselves, is never addressed. The reason for this is that in the books, as far as I am aware, the Kingsmen and the faithful are completely separate groups and there is no overlap between the two. And the reason why this doesn't make sense in Rings of Power is because Rings of Power has decided that Pharazôn's guards are the king's men, even though these guards used to be guards for Miriel and her father. Then, the guards show up and Eärien is like, sorry, nothing to see here, move along, but the guard doesn't appear to believe her.
Shall I tell our Pharazôn of your insolence?
The guard then says, I'm sorry, who the fuck are you? And she replies,
I am Kemen Slampiece, have you not heard of me?
and the guard is like, oh, okay. We then see that Elendil is just hiding around the corner like this is Scooby fucking Doo, and just like that, the guards don't find him. We then see that Elendil has decided to get Miriel to safety. I do like that this is his immediate concern, because quite obviously she will be a prime target in Pharazôn's newfound desire to persecute his political opponents. The problem is, how the fuck has Miriel not already been arrested or questioned? Pharazôn appears to believe that she is working with Sauron, and yet not only is she not also rounded up alongside the other leaders of the faithful, but Pharazôn seems to forget that she even exists when he sends his men into the city. Elendil has managed to get to Miriel without getting caught by the king's men, who are scouring the city looking for the faithful, despite the fact that Elendil and Miriel are the most well-known faithful in Númenor. He then tells her that they must head to the fabled land of West, the place Isildur kind of wanted to go but not really back in Season 1. Elendil then name-drops his other son, Anarion, who was casually mentioned once in Season 1.
Anarion told me you deferred twice.
Anarion? What's your brother have to do with this?
West Númenor is seemingly treated as a safe haven for members of the faithful, but how and why this is the case is never addressed. If West Númenor is totally cool and shit, then why hasn't there already been a mass exodus following the events earlier in the season? Alternatively, why has no one from West Númenor come back to the city in an attempt to stop Pharazôn? Well, I'm glad you asked. Moving on. Miriel says that she will not be going with him.
One does not need eyes to lead in the dark.
I don't know what this means, because Miriel seems to be saying that she can lead in the dark even though she can't see, and she is presumably referring to the prospect of leading Númenor, which would necessitate regaining control over it. As we have already seen, Miriel does not want to interfere with Pharazôn's kingship except for when she wants to interfere with Pharazôn's kingship, and so it is unclear why she is opting not to go with Elendil. Elendil, of course, says that he will not flee while she is in danger, and he asks where his place is if not with her. But no time for that now. Miriel says,
It is called Narsil.
we have never seen Narsil before in Rings of Power. This is not a sword that Miriel has worn or used, nor has her father, nor has it been present in any other scenes. What happens in-universe is that Miriel gives Elendil a sword and says, go and get your lordship back and reclaim your destiny. Out of universe, these fucking writers spend almost a minute of runtime being like,
Guys, I don't know if you noticed, but look, it's the thing from the thing.
You've seen this before. Look, we took something that you know and we put it in our thing.
The characters are going to treat it with the same reverence you have for it, because this isn't a story told through its characters. This is a sequence of dopamine hits spaced out in a calculating manner.
And every now and then we will just focus hard on something that appeared in the Peter Jackson movies.
Look, Elendil is taking the sword out just like Aragorn did. You liked it when Aragorn did, so it happened again.
This fucking show exists to leech off of something else. It is honestly difficult to imagine watching Rings of Power with zero knowledge of the books or films, but I'm guessing it would be more confusing, but perhaps slightly less frustrating. Because every time the show is like, guys, holy shit, it's a sword! And oh my god, it's a magical happy place with green hills and water, and fuck me, it's Gandalf! Or is he? The viewer would be like, why are we just inflating our runtime by focusing on random bullshit? I imagine it would be something like being in Eregion and then being like, oh wow, it's a chair, look at this chair, it has 4 legs and this amazing cushion, and oh wow, look at the engraving on the armrest, that is so cool. Anyway, moving on. Pharazôn has read the script, but also doesn't understand how to use guards. Eärien continues to help Pharazôn for some reason. Eärien now actually doesn't want her father to die, and it's treason then. Miriel wants to stay and face the fun, and Elendil goes west, but doesn't really wanna. We now return to Eregion, where the catapults are still bombarding the city while the orcs run through the streets because Adar truly does love his children. Galadriel is for some fucking reason still here, even though at least a few hours have passed since she was told to take survivors into the dwarven tunnels. She has also apparently only managed to find 10 survivors. The fact that she seemingly had to go door to door and gather survivors would indicate that the elves of Eregion do not know of the existence of the Dwarven Tunnel, but anyway, she takes them to the Dwarven Tunnel and oh no, there's orcs waiting at the other end. Which means Adar did know about this tunnel, and yet he did not use it. Which means he had his children unga-bunga themselves at the walls of Eregion for a couple of days when this was not his only option. Anyway, Galadriel tells the orcs that she knows Adar wants her, and that if they allow the survivors to leave, she will go willingly.
Give me one reason, elf.
I will give you 9.
The orc replies, oh, okay, I don't know what that means, and then the orcs start killing the survivors. Like, oh, cool, a bag of why would the fuck would I care about a bag of rings? This is also yet another instance of the scene cutting away before the conversation can end, and it is another example of everyone within Amazon's Middle-earth just kind of having this collective knowledge that some things are very, very, very important. The rings for men, Narsil, the Shire, Mithril, the Eagle. The list goes on and fucking on. Also, I find it highly amusing that Celebrimbor just sacrificed himself to give Galadriel the chance to escape with the rings and take them as far away from Eregion as she can. This was more important to Celebrimbor than his own life. And Galadriel has just bumped into this orc and been like, hey, I've got a bunch of magic rings, now take me to see Adar. Also, even if this orc understands that these are evil magic rings that will allow Adar to take over Middle-earth, this is not a reason for the orcs to spare the survivors. The orcs would grab Galadriel, because it has been revealed that it only takes a couple of them to do so, and they would then execute the survivors. Because this is exactly the behavior that we have seen from the orcs throughout Rings of Power. Okay, Galadriel, well, she actually rescues civilians on screen now, so we can get rid of that. She has seemingly learned that rescuing people is, it's a good thing to do. However, immediately gives up the rings that Celebrimbor died for. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor is being tortured by Sauron. Sauron is capable of untold magical feats, and his chosen method is to use Celebrimbor for target practice. I would have expected Sauron's methods to be more on the psychological front, perhaps by showing Celebrimbor visions of his friends and family being killed over and over. But this doesn't happen for 2 reasons. One reason is that this would take time, effort, and creativity, and having Sauron shoot him with a bow is much faster. And the other reason is that Celebrimbor doesn't actually know anyone, other than Elrond, Galadriel, and Gil-galad. Celebrimbor's plan here was to buy time for Galadriel to escape, and so he returned to Sauron and said, yeah, the rings are kind of gone. I totally know where they are, though, which is perhaps not the best plan, but I kind of get the gist of it. He is going to demonstrate that his will is mightier than that of his captor, and he is going to allow Sauron to torture him, all the while the rings are getting further and further away from him. Or so he believes. Thank you, Galadriel. One small problem with this plan, however, is that Sauron can enter people's minds, and he also appears to have some control over the passage of time. If Sauron was able, as seen in Season 1, to conjure the image of Finrod by poking around in Galadriel's mind, then this means he can extract information from people's brains. Additionally, even if he can't do this, he could trap Celebrimbor inside of another time loop, which means the passage of time outside of the Forge is irrelevant. Sauron says,
"Look, what you have done to yourself."
And he tells Celebrimbor that the orcs will be here at any moment. Sauron is continuing to pretend to be friendly, which at this point serves absolutely no purpose. He is essentially doing good cop, bad cop, but where he is both of them. He demands to know where the rings are, and in return, he will end Celebrimbor's suffering. Celebrimbor replies that the rings are beyond his reach, as he shall be soon.
Soon I shall go to the shores of the morning, borne hence by a wind that you can never follow.
Sauron then says that he has ways of keeping Celebrimbor alive. Celebrimbor then calls him the Shadow of Morgoth in a clear attempt to provoke Sauron into killing him. He says that the rings shall destroy him, and that in the end, he foresees that one shall prove Sauron's utter ruin. Here, he is referring to the One Ring, although how Celebrimbor knows this is, as expected, entirely unexplained. Typically, when the writers want to inject information into their characters' brains, they generally employ in-universe magical bullshit, such as the rings or the Palantir, but in this instance, Celebrimbor just kind of knows, and I have no explanation for why. This, for some reason, pisses Sauron the hell off, and he kebabs Celebrimbor with a polearm.
You are wrong. I am their creator.
Celebrimbor replies that Sauron is actually their prisoner. He says, no, it is you who is the Lord of the Rings. and then Sauron cries.
Sauron, Lord of the Rings.
The only thing I like about this is that it is a callback to their first meeting when Sauron turned into Anatar, and it was suggested that Celebrimbor can become the Lord of the Rings himself, and he has now realized that he was a pawn that allowed Sauron to become the Lord of the Rings. He has flipped this line back at Anatar, and in his dying moments said, "You wanted to trick me into being the Lord of the Rings, but in the end it is you who will be tricked by the rings." Sauron only appears to have been torturing Celebrimbor for a few hours, as Galadriel has only just made it out of the city, and the orcs have not yet entered the forge, which means Celebrimbor hasn't really bought Galadriel much time at all. Rather than taking the massive risk of having Sauron extract the information from him through torture or simply through supernatural means, he could have escaped with Galadriel or honestly just killed himself, given that his plan here necessitated his death anyway. But he instead chose to undergo torture to buy Galadriel a couple of hours, which does not seem worth the risk at all. And this is, of course, ignoring the fact that both Sauron and Celebrimbor know that Sauron is capable of extracting information from people's brains. Additionally, Sauron has just killed Celebrimbor without ever seeing the finished rings for men, so he has no idea if they are finished, what they do, or if they work. For all Sauron knows, Celebrimbor has secretly made these rings so that they cause the bearer to turn into a chicken, which would have ruined Sauron's entire plan. Anyway, after killing Celebrimbor, Sauron starts crying. We have previously seen Sauron get emotional, so this isn't necessarily out of character for Rings of Power's version of Sauron, but I am unsure why Sauron is sad. Was it because he killed Celebrimbor, whom he genuinely admired for his skill? Maybe, but his treatment of Celebrimbor was beyond inhumane. He absolutely viewed Celebrimbor as a tool to be exploited, and the idea that they were actually friends to any degree is laughable. Was it because he was unable to control himself and he allowed himself to be provoked? Maybe he could be crying because in his final moments Celebrimbor managed to poke a hole in Sauron's resolve and cause him to react emotionally. Was it because what Celebrimbor said was true? This is probably what the writers were going for. Sauron cries because he realizes that he has become a slave to the rings. Or, to be more specific, a slave to his own ambition. The rings have controlled his every move in Season 2. The problem with this is that Sauron is seemingly near infinite in his power, and he is the evil mastermind behind the rings. He has absolute information regarding his plan, whatever his plan actually is, and he also, of course, knows how powerful he is. Celebrimbor does not know any of this, which means whatever Celebrimbor's perception of Sauron's evil plan may be, it cannot be accurate, because he doesn't have all the information. Sauron cannot be crying because Celebrimbor was right, unless Sauron has just been winging it this entire time, which is absolutely not the case, as I will get to later. But then, oh no, Glug is here.
Are you Sauron?
Yep, that's me. Sorry, Glug, but even you can't escape the whims of the writers. Has Glug just been going around Eregion, finding every elf and being like, "Excuse me, hello, are you Sauron?" Okay, no, whoops. Like, come on, man, what the fuck are you expecting him to say? Sauron then asks Glug's name, and the scene cuts away before we see what happens next. Okay, Sauron tortures when he can just not, kills Celebrimbor instead of jumping into his brain and grabbing what he needs, and he also, sad, Celebrimbor, I mean, he goes out like a Chad, but at the same time, he knows things he can't know, and thanks to Galadriel, Celebrimbor's death really doesn't mean much. He basically dies for nothing. And Glug wants to find Sauron. We then return to Pelargir for the first time since episode 4. A Númenorian ship has arrived and Númenorians are handing out supplies. As for who sent this ship and how much time has passed, we will have some answers shortly. Inside of the single interior set in Pelargir, Isildur is playing with a knife. Lord Theo of House No Parents tells Isildur that it is bad luck to pack a dagger in a bag.
See, it cuts the journey short.
Fuck you!
I honestly can't tell if this is meant to be a joke, because this guy can't fucking act. Isildur then replies that he has been stabbed before, and so therefore he can't be stabbed again.
This one's already stabbed me once.
I'd wager the damage is done.
Oh yeah, how is your thigh doing? It's totally fine. Yeah, I thought so. But you see, this is the rare moment in Rings of Power where the dialogue has two meanings. But true to form, this is as surface level as is possible whilst still having more than one layer. Estrid metaphorically stabbed him because she strung him along hoping that he would whisk her away to Numenor, only to later reveal that the betrothed she had been talking about the entire time for some reason does actually exist, and so he has kept the knife to remember not to make the same mistake again. The mistake of trusting women who stab you the moment they set eyes on you. And the other meaning is that Estrid literally stabbed him with that knife, and so the damage has been done. Which is not how knives work. Just because you have been stabbed once doesn't mean you can't get stabbed again. Which means that whilst, yes, this dialogue does indeed have two meanings, one of them is beyond nonsense. Theo then asks how Isildur lives with the fact that he got his mother killed, because if you recall, Theo for some reason thinks that Bronwyn's off-screen death is his fault. Isildur replies that he does so poorly, which suggests that Isildur is very aware that he is a scatterbrained little shit who tries and fails to justify his actions by saying that he wants to be worthy of his mother's sacrifice. But the problem is that the show doesn't appear to understand that Isildur is indeed a scatterbrained little shit. Rings of Power seems to think that Isildur's only flaw is that he acts without thinking. He continues that seeing that there were grander things in Middle-earth showed him how poorly he has dealt with his mother's death and revealed how small he really is. This dialogue is clunky, but seems to suggest that Isildur has become more selfless due to his experiences in Middle-earth. He has begun to realize that the world does not revolve around him, which is usually something that people discover when they are in their mid-childhood, not when they are in their mid-20s. Anyway, Isildur is going to return to Numenor, whilst Theo wants to stay with the peasants.
Like it better being a low man.
Says the Lord of Pelargir, whom we later see moping around because no one is respecting his authority. Isildur offers a handshake, but Theo gives him a hug. This would potentially be an emotionally effective moment if not for the fact that both of these characters are complete tits. Also, Isildur totally left Theo for dead before realizing, oh wait, I probably shouldn't do that, but it's these little details that help Rings of Power maintain its status as a thorough failure, rather than just an approximate failure. So Theo leaves, and then, oh fuck off, why is she here? I still don't entirely understand why this character was in the show, but she's back to say goodbye. Before we deal with that, however, this necessitates that I update you on the state of Pelargir following the events of episode 4. We find out soon that the peasants of Pelargir have allied with the people of Wild. They are all living together hand in hand singing Kumbaya. Hagen, Estrid's betrothed, is in charge of half of the colony, implying that half of the colony currently living in Pelargir are people of Wild. How this happened is a mystery. Obviously it happened off screen, which means it didn't actually happen, but the peasants were not exactly what you would call open to the idea of living with the people of Wild.
They're not men, they're animals. They'd eat human flesh if they had to.
They are all the same, you see. Some of them just occasionally trick travelers and murder them to steal their horses. Which means there must have been some kind of conflict between these two groups, but actually, no there wasn't, fuck you, on with the show. Hagen, if you recall, was heavily implied to be an acolyte of Adar.
That's not Adar's brand.
Proof I've done more for him than any of you can claim.
Try us.
But actually, he's all better now. He's just a totally normal person who wants to settle down with Estrid and build a house with her. Isildur says he is happy for them, and I'm unsure why, because she is a bitch. She has done nothing but fuck around with him for her own gain since they met. She stabbed him in the leg with the highly dubious defense that she thought he was an orc. She concealed the fact that she was a person of Wild, which apparently means that you are evil but not really, and then seemingly tried to manipulate Isildur into falling for her and whisking her away to Numenor, whilst both of them were aware that she apparently had a betrothed that she had been looking for in the last few weeks. So, then Estrid tells Isildur that maybe she doesn't really love Hagen.
I always thought his kindness was what love felt like, but when he said it, I felt ill.
Keep trying, honey. I'm sure you'll get the hang of acting soon, but it is not this day. Estrid reveals that actually she is mildly damp for a certain scatterbrained Númenórean, and then they kiss. Maybe she does actually have feelings for Isildur, the guy she met 5 minutes ago, but there is no way in hell that Isildur should trust this snake. Her betrothed, Hagen, might be a devout follower of evil, but he is literally building a house for her right now. And by her own admission, he does truly love her. And she has just decided, actually, no, fuck that. This Isildur guy is really, he has nice ears. This being some big dramatic climax, which is absolutely how this is treated, is hilarious and absurd, because Estrid is a manipulative whore, and Isildur is a man-child who is desperate to do whatever is dangled right in front of him. So, he asks Estrid to come with him, because, yeah, this is seemingly exactly what she wanted, because when Isildur accused her of using him to escape to Numenor, she dodges the accusation and says, oh, well, what was I supposed to do? And she is evidently still invested in using Isildur to reach a better life across the sea. Isildur, however, doesn't suspect a thing because the writers won't let him, because they have decided that actually Estrid is not using him. They are indeed in love. Okay, Isildur thinks knives only work once, claims to be selfless when being selfish. Estrid cucks her fiancé. Theo likes being a low man when he is a lord, and also tells jokes, I think. Then we cut away to, how the fuck are you here? Why has Pharazôn continued to send Kemen on important missions after his recent fuck-up? And by recent fuck-up, I mean every day he has been alive, because we have yet to see Kemen do anything with any degree of competence. Also, this establishing shot a couple of minutes ago at the start of the scene showed quite clearly that Theo was standing at the dock as Kemen arrived, but he evidently did not introduce himself then. He then teleported to the single interior set in Pelargir, and then he teleports back to the dock to introduce himself to Kemen. This inconsistency comes about entirely because the establishing shot they filmed on the day had Theo in it. Likely because it was filmed as a part of this upcoming dialogue sequence, but they then spliced in the prior conversation inside the house, which essentially means they didn't properly plan what they were filming. Imagine that! Kemen being here now means that at least a month has passed since the events of episode 6 in Numenor. Kemen addresses the peasants as low men. Theo replies,
I'm Theo, son of Bronwyn.
And Kemen replies, I don't know who Bronwyn is, but okay. After Kemen ignores Theo, because why would Kemen give a shit about who Theo or Bronwyn are, Hagen, who is also here, says,
Perhaps you didn't hear. This is Theo. His mother was Bronwyn.
Kemen is a guy who just got off a boat. He has never seen any of you before, and repeating, hello, this is Theo, son of Bronwyn, doesn't mean Kemen is going to suddenly be like, oh fuck, you're the son of some random chick who died off screen, why didn't you fucking say so? And Kemen's reply is,
his mother was Bronwyn.
Of course she was. And who are you?
Because, quite obviously, he would have no idea who Bronwyn is, but why Theo and Hagen thought he would have heard of this legendary medic is a hilarious mystery until the writers invent an off-screen deal that totally happened, I promise. Dialogue exchanges like this give a lot of credibility to the theory that the script for Rings of Power was written by an AI, because the characters do not communicate like people. Theo says that he and Hagen are here to uphold the agreement they made with Miriel. What agreement are they referencing? Well, you know, the one that happened off screen, of course. And so all the details of it are unknown, almost as if this agreement was invented so as to allow for drama during Season 2. Kemen replies that he has altered the deal.
Pray I don't alter it any further.
Kemen, if you have been paying attention, is evil. And he says that they are going to build a watchtower and that if they have to destroy some houses in the process, then it is the house's fault for getting in the way. Honestly, I am a little surprised that they didn't have Kemen show up and start building a wall to keep the peasants out. Isildur is then like, hey Kemen, what's up? And Kemen's brain tells all of the muscles in his face to activate at the same time. And he then says that he never gave up hope that Isildur was alive, and that Eärien will be pleased to hear the news. Then things get fucking weird. Isildur tells Kemen that he will make room on the ship for one more, referring to Estrid. Kemen refuses to take any low men with him, and Isildur replies that he survived an eruption. His sister is a guild member, and his father is Miriel's captain. He basically says, well, my family is all really well respected, even though I'm not, so you better do what I say. This is entirely in line with how he behaved in Season 1, where he attempted to leverage his father's rank and respectability to join the army, and when that failed, he tricked his father into letting him join the army. And so the suggestion that Isildur is aware of his flaws and has grown as a character is almost as laughable as it is with Galadriel. Kemen, however, says that he cannot make an exception, as Pharazôn is now the king and Elendil is wanted for treason. Then Kemen says this.
If I'd had it my way, the old fool would be dead.
I don't know why he said this. The only reason I can think of is that Kemen has gone 5 seconds without being evil, so the writers were like, yeah, well, he can just kind of be a prick for no reason, that'll work. Isildur reminds Kemen that he saved his life, and Kemen responds,
"Shall I have them slaughter the horse? These people do look hungry."
Which gets Isildur back in line. Kemen then declares that Pelargir is no longer a colony, but a fortress for its soldiers, and Kemen has been placed in charge. Any low men who wish to remain must regularly deliver timber from the forest that will be used to create an armada for Pharazôn. This armada presumably will consist of about 3 ships.
But I'm certain that won't be a problem for you. After all, they're only trees.
There is no reason for Kemen to say this in this way. The only reason why he does is because we, the audience, know that they are no trees. And this is of course set up for future drama in Season 3. Anyway, this timber will be exchanged for the food and supplies that were originally promised by Miriel off-screen. Then we cut away, without addressing the elephant in the room. Isildur just asked Kemen to make room for one more, the suggestion being that he was going to take Estrid with him. Hagen was within earshot of this conversation, and he walks over but doesn't say anything, and then we move on to the dialogue exchange between Isildur and Kemen. Hagen does not say a single fucking word, even though Isildur and his fiancée are very obviously about to elope, and they are not trying to hide this in the slightest. Which means he would absolutely say something, but of course the writers don't let him. Which means Hagen has been cucked by the writers not knowing how to properly construct a scene. And not only does Hagen not say anything here, he doesn't say another word for the rest of the episode. Okay, Kemen is really mean. Pharazôn puts his idiot son in charge of important shit. Isildur, do you have any idea who his father is? And Hagen. Cuck. Back at Adar's favourite rock, Galadriel arrives. It is entirely unclear why Adar is hugging a rock instead of hunting down Sauron. Galadriel says that she accepts Adar's terms because she has what Sauron seeks. Okay, what the fuck? This is frying my brain. I've hung in for 8 episodes, but this one is testing my mental fortitude. She accepts Adar's terms. What were Adar's terms? Well, Adar didn't really present terms back in episode 6. He wanted to combine the power of the Elven Rings with the Crown of Morgoth, but he never actually asked Galadriel to hand over the ring in exchange for something. Which means this is the second consecutive scene in which the characters are referencing a deal that was proposed in the past, which isn't actually something that ever happened. Also, Galadriel knows that Adar's plan involves vaporizing Sauron by combining the Elven Rings with the Crown of Morgoth. Adar does not believe that he needs Galadriel's help to accomplish this, and Galadriel knows this. The presence of the rings for men changes nothing. Her having what Sauron wants doesn't have anything to do with her willingness or ability to help Adar defeat Sauron. Additionally, she was previously entirely on board with teaming up with Adar, but it was Adar who pulled the plug, believing that he did not need Galadriel's help. Which means, essentially, Galadriel has shown up like, hey, I now agree to team up with you, even though I already agreed to team up with you, and I'm agreeing because I have something Sauron wants, even though this has nothing to do with you or our deal.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Adar then reveals that he is wearing Galadriel's ring, taken from Elrond at the end of episode 7. He says that even wounds that have endured an age can be healed, and he reveals that he is now Smexy. Now that Adar is highly fuckable, Middle-earth is doomed because Galadriel begs him to handcuff her again. No, wait, sorry, that doesn't happen just yet.
When last I looked like this, I was known by another name.
He does not reveal what his previous name was, but he says that Adar is the name he has earned. I do find the theory that Adar is Celeborn rather amusing, and I was wondering if this was going to be revealed in this scene. It would be utter nonsense, but that of course does not preclude any particular narrative developments in Rings of Power. Who Adar was is never revealed, making this another mystery box that probably won't be answered anytime soon, if ever, or in the common tongue, this is usually known as a waste of fucking time. He returns Galadriel's ring to her, asking her to help him vanquish Sauron with it. I can't tell you why Adar has suddenly changed his mind. And I also can't tell you why Galadriel is suddenly like,
oh man, you're really tragic and dark and brooding and cute and those thighs.
Stop it, woman, remember what happened last time. Adar says that if she helps him deal with Sauron, he will recall his children to Mordor and will never make war on Middle-earth again. Now, Adar had precisely this option presented to him back in episode 6, and he turned it down. His reason for turning it down was that he did not believe that Gilgadingus would allow him to remain in Mordor in peace. now that he has torched an entire fucking city to the ground and has slaughtered what the dialogue would suggest is thousands of people, but what the visuals would suggest is maybe 25 people, he has decided, yeah, I'm actually all about that deal now. This is a tremendous reversal of his values and priorities, and I can't tell you why he changed his mind. The best I can do, and what I honestly expect is what the writers want us to believe, is that this is a ring of good, and it gooded him. Also, the fact that Adar's skin goes all evil and shit within seconds of him removing the ring makes me wonder what is currently going on with the Tree of Symbolism, because Galadriel has not been wearing her ring since episode 4, and currently only one of the 3 is even in Lindon. From what the show has told us, you need all 3 rings to be in use to stop the tree from becoming gooey, and if you take the ring off, you become gooey pretty quickly, which should mean that the tree is currently gooey. But this is, of course, never mentioned. Galadriel says that she has killed more of Adar's children than any elf alive, reminding me that these two should despise each other more than anyone else. But they don't because...
Man, look at that jawline. Oh my, it's like the Niagara Falls down there.
Adar then forgives Galadriel for genociding his children, because when you put on a ring of power, it removes all of your character traits and replaces them with new ones. Galadriel accepts Adar's forgiveness, and I will remind you that she doesn't know that Elrond, Arondir, and Gilgajuice are alive. And not to belabor the point, but Adar has just wiped out an entire fucking city. And then, oh no, Glug has been wounded. So, the last time we saw Glug, he was like, hey, are you Sauron? And then we cut away, so I guess Sauron was like, no? And then he killed all of the orcs by snapping his fingers, but left Glug alive because Glug said, wait, I have Glugwife and Glugling. And because Sauron was all emotional and shit, he decided not to finish off Glug. So, the other orc says that they found Sauron, and that Sauron tried to make Glug betray Adar, but Glug resisted. Adar reassures Glug and says that it is not too late. And then something happens that genuinely caught me off guard.
It's too late.
This reveals that Sauron did convince Glug to betray Adar, which explains how Glug is alive and why Sauron didn't kill him. But, from Adar's perspective, everything I just said still stands. For a moment, Adar genuinely believed that Glug, some random fucking orc, had not only managed to resist Sauron, but also managed to escape with his life. Adar should have been like, how the fuck did you get away from him? He's Sauron. Adar is also very aware of the fact that Glug's loyalty to him has absolutely been wavering, but he apparently doesn't expect any kind of stab-backery because the script has decided that it is time for Adar to die. The writers seem to think that Adar has been somewhat redeemed, because in his final moments he forgives Galadriel for her genocide, and he suggests that he will go home and forget the whole thing. Plus, of course, Adar is now silky smooth. But again, I have to state the obvious, Adar was not fucking redeemed. He has just offered peace after committing a devastating and heinous war crime. He is a piece of shit who literally burned down a city and sacrificed what we are led to believe is thousands, if not tens of thousands, of his children, completely unnecessarily in the process. And this is just a couple of months after he exploded the Southlands and murdered a whole load of peasants. But actually, he's redeemed in his final moments because, don't you know, he just wanted to go home and put his feet up. Then the orcs Julius Caesar Adar in much the same way that they shanked Sauron in episode 1, because this show is indeed like poetry. Sauron then appears, and I can't explain this in any other way. We don't see him walk towards Galadriel, he's just suddenly here. And Galadriel does not notice him until he says hi. Galadriel also just kind of stands nearby while the orcs kill Adar. She doesn't try to run or save him or kill Sauron. She instead politely waits for her next cue. Sauron informs Adar that the orcs are not his children anymore before Glug delivers the killing blow, and that is the end of Adar. Having now disposed of Adar, Glug can return home to Glugwife and Glugling, except that no! He immediately asks Sauron what his orders are. The orcs are ordered to raise Eregion, to kill every elf, but to bring him the elven leaders. Glug's whole deal was that he didn't want war, he wanted happy. Look, it's fucking written right there. And throughout episodes 6 and 7, he became less willing to follow Adar into the meat grinder. Now he has turned on Adar, and one would think he would be like, alright, cool, I'm done here. But no. Sauron says, get back out there and keep doing the thing that you were already doing. Glug's response here should be, oh, fuck, did I make a mistake? But instead he chants, Hail Sauron, Hail Sauron. Which means, and I really thought I would never actually say this, Glug has been character assassinated. This is not character development. This is character inversion.
But random, Sauron is really powerful and mind-controlling and the orcs are really corruptible or something. I don't know, read a fucking book.
Stop it, retarded alter ego. They've ruined Glug, and I think Rings of Power has ruined me. Glug was the only thing I cared about in this diarrhea, and the writers have snapped their fingers and turned him into the opposite of who he was.
I'm sorry, darling.
Sorry, why are you sorry?
I'm sorry, you've let me in for too long. Now I can do this.
Do what?
So if you think about it, the tornado was a magic tornado. It probably dropped Nori off because it happened off screen. Anatar didn't intend to kill, only to maim or seriously injure. Ishnu Allah, Tor Ilasa Theranal. In Highlander 2, The Quickening, Michael Ironside uses lightning to make a train travel at Mach 5. This scene shows us in exquisite detail how Poppy and Simple Jack are paying tribute to She Who Thirsts. Saremomichi, Kara Harazura Naishi, Hitori de Aruko Hitomo Inai. Silent night, holy night, all is calm and bright. This causes everyone on the train to become weightless, and half of this man's face turns into Play-Doh because that's what happens when you're travelling in a hypersonic train. Und der Scheld muss der Elder entscheiden. Der Elder ist gütig. Logically speaking, Sauron should have stayed in Eregion and not gone to Mordor at all.
Back in your cage, all of you. I said go on, get out of here. Okay, Adar is hot, is sorry, thinks Glug is a Giga Chad. Galadriel agrees to things she already agreed to. Glug forgets that he wants happy, now wants to obey Sauron back to Unga Bunga. Galadriel then observes that Sauron planned all of this from the start, as she considers that Sauron replacing Adar is confirmation that she was entirely correct in her assertion in episode 6 that Sauron wanted Adar to attack Eregion. Sauron replies,
"Please, you think too much of me."
And he suggests that he was merely an opportunist, planting seeds and waiting to see what would happen. As Sauron turns his back on Galadriel because reasons, Galadriel picks up a sword and attempts to kill Sauron, but he blocks this with the crown of Morgoth. Sauron then becomes very interested in her ring and demands that she give it to him. So let's quickly consider what each character wants. Galadriel wants to kill Sauron, and so she is going to keep trying unless he kills her or unless he runs away. In order to accomplish this, she needs to get the crown of Morgoth from him. So, naturally, the fight revolves around her trying to get the crown. Except that, no it doesn't, because she doesn't attempt this once. Sauron wants Galadriel's ring and the rings for men, and although he says he does not wish to harm Galadriel, he will absolutely harm her if she gets in his way. Luckily, the writers have a narrative device they have frequently employed throughout both seasons known as magical bullshit, specifically the fact that Sauron can incapacitate people by touching them. So, naturally, the fight revolves around him trying to make physical contact with her. Except that no it doesn't, because he doesn't attempt this once. Now that we have established each character's objectives during this fight, Galadriel attacks Sauron, complete with gigantic baseball bat swings and pointless spins, because this is shorthand for look at me, I am skilled. Sauron blocks every strike with ease. Then, Sauron harnesses the power of editing to inflict a flesh wound on Galadriel, and I'm going to pause here just before we cut away to Eregion to assess Sauron's evil plan, now that it has been revealed in full. Sauron's evil plan in Season 2 is even more batshit insane than it was in Season 1, which is certainly saying something. How much of it was reliant upon luck or throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks is probably a question that can never be answered. But what we can do here is work out what Sauron actually did in Season 2, how Adar apparently played into Sauron's hands, and how much sense this all makes. So, it is once again time to go through everything meaningful Sauron has done in these 8 episodes. Step 1. After revealing his identity to Galadriel at the end of Season 1, Sauron travels to the Axa Bridge and blows it up with lightning. He also evils the Barrow Wights into existence. Sauron simply must have done this before going to Mordor, but after Elrond and Galadriel travelled to Lindon, because the bridge must have been intact when they crossed it at the start of Season 2, but it was of course destroyed by the time the company of Elrond attempted to cross it in Episode 4. This move is predicated entirely on disrupting transport and the transmission of information between Eregion and Lindon, which would help Sauron as it weakens his enemy, but the destruction of this bridge and the presence of the Barrow Wights plays out better than he could possibly have expected, as this act prevents Celebrimbor from learning of Sauron's identity. Had this not gone perfectly, his evil plan fails before he even begins to craft the rings, which means whilst he absolutely did plan this, he was obscenely lucky. Step 2. Sauron then travels to Mordor under the guise of Halbrand, the king of the Southlands. He surrenders so as to negotiate with Adar. He claims that the elves are working with Sauron and says that he will locate Sauron for Adar so that Adar can destroy him. In return, Sauron asks that the Southlanders are set free. Adar refuses the deal and elects to torture Sauron for the information instead. After an unspecified amount of time, Adar concedes, releases the Southlanders, and agrees to let Sauron go, with the understanding that he will return when he has located Sauron. Adar also sends an orc to follow him. I am convinced that the only reason this happens is because the writers wanted to end Season 1 with the shot of Sauron in Mordor, which then meant for Season 2 they had to come up with a reason for him to be in Mordor when he could have just stayed in Eregion. Regardless, the purpose of this as it relates to Sauron's evil plan is that this is what eventually leads to Adar attacking Eregion, and so him dangling this bait in front of Adar was seemingly necessary, provided that it makes sense that Sauron does indeed want Adar to attack Eregion. Aside from this, the only thing he accomplishes here is that he gets the Southlanders released, which is not something that actually benefits him, which means his reason for going to Mordor was to put Adar on the path for Eregion, and the deal with the Southlanders was merely a cover story. This, for lack of a better word, is utter fucking nonsense, because it does not make sense for Sauron to artificially impose a time limit upon his mission to forge the rings, and even if he did want to give himself a time limit, the information he conveys to Adar logically should not lead Adar to attack Eregion. The only two pieces of connective tissue that we have are that in Season 1, Adar was curious as to who Halbrand was, but at the start of Season 2, Adar very clearly did not have any suspicions that Halbrand was Sauron, because if he did, then he would have killed him then and there. The only other connection is the orc that follows Sauron. Firstly, this orc can only have followed Sauron if Sauron allowed it, but as this orc is never mentioned again, surprise, surprise, we must guess as to what actually happened. Either Sauron killed the orc immediately and that was that, or alternatively, he allowed the orc to follow him all the way to Eregion, and the orc then returned to Mordor to inform Adar. This orc cannot have learned that Halbrand was Sauron, which means the only information this orc could have provided Adar is that Halbrand has gone to Eregion, which Adar already knew. The only other option is that Sauron mind-raped the orc and told him to return to Adar and inform him that Halbrand is Sauron, and I don't think it is at all reasonable to just invent that this happened to try and make the story make sense, which means this orc that was sent to follow Sauron is just a non sequitur that doesn't lead anywhere. Step 3. Sauron returns to Eregion. He fails to convince Myrdania to let him in, and after waiting at the gate for an unspecified amount of time, Celebrimbor lets him in. This relies entirely upon Celebrimbor not ejecting him from the city, and the guards allowing him to just kind of stand there, which Sauron cannot have known was going to happen because this is not normal behavior, which means this is another instance of blind luck where everything just kind of goes exactly according to plan. Step 4. Sauron takes on the guise of Anatar and convinces Celebrimbor that they must make magic rings to save the world. This is the first time Sauron acts in a somewhat intelligent manner. And when I say intelligent, I mean that the progression of his plan is down to his ability to manipulate Celebrimbor, rather than things just randomly working out for him. There are issues with this part of the plan, but it gets a pass in terms of coherent narrative progression. Step 5. Sauron summons Durin and Disa to Eregion. He pressures the dwarves to immediately exchange mithril for rings, the dwarves agree, and they forge the rings. This relies entirely upon Sauron having knowledge of the current crisis in Khazad-dûm, which he can't know unless he disguised himself and went into the city prior to going to Eregion. I am not willing to accept that this is what happened because we have no reason to believe that it did, which means Sauron either guessed that the dwarves would want rings and was correct, or he knew that because Mount Doom erupted, this would inherently cause a crisis in Khazad-dûm, which is not exactly intuitive, meaning Sauron inexplicably drew from information he cannot have known. Step 6. Sauron tricks Celebrimbor, causing him to lie to Gil-galad and claim that he is shutting down the forge. This one, I think, is the first plausible example of Sauron just kind of winging it and letting things play out. He begins by telling Celebrimbor that they need to be quick and discreet in forging the rings, and it makes sense for Sauron to want this. Celebrimbor taking this opportunity to send a letter, however, is not something Sauron predicted, and the problems with this all relate to Celebrimbor's characterization, which means, as this relates to Sauron's evil plan, this does get a pass, and is our first coherent instance of Sauron being an opportunist. Step 7. Sauron unsuccessfully pressures Celebrimbor into making rings for men, and he resolves to forge them himself. He and the smiths make an evil ring, and he somehow gets it onto Midania's hand, causing her to be transported to the unseen world. Sauron leverages this danger to convince Celebrimbor to help him forge rings for men. As I went into in part 5, this was either random chance or Sauron planned this specifically to convince Celebrimbor to help. I think this was absolutely a deliberate move for reasons I have already been into, but even so, this is an insane risk that results in Midania accidentally seeing Sauron's true form. Step 8. Sauron convinces Midania that the evil creature she saw was actually Celebrimbor. This is only necessary because Sauron let Midania see his true form, but where Sauron could have claimed that the unseen world is entirely uncharted territory, and that he has no idea what the creature was, he instead diverts suspicion onto Celebrimbor. This is another example of Sauron being an opportunist and beginning to drive a wedge between Midania and Celebrimbor, in case this becomes useful later. Step 9. Sauron convinces Celebrimbor that his lie to Gil-galad caused the dwarven rings to go tits up. This is blind luck, and it relies on his earlier opportunistic move that resulted in Celebrimbor sending a letter to Gil-galad. This paying off in the way that it does is, again, pure luck, as it allows him to put Celebrimbor's mind at ease, relatively speaking, with regard to the dwarven rings. Step 10. Sauron assumes control over Eregion and confines Celebrimbor to the forge. It makes sense for Sauron to want to do this, and this is enabled due to the fact that Celebrimbor's mental health has been deteriorating. As I have been into, there are absolutely problems with this, but Sauron wanting to do this and being able to do this is something that does make sense. Step 11. Sauron realizes that Adar is preparing to invade Eregion. This is where Adar rejoins Sauron's plan. Although Sauron later suggests to Galadriel that he was merely an opportunist and that he did not want Adar to attack Eregion, his reaction in this scene says otherwise. If this was entirely unplanned and unexpected, then Sauron's reaction should have been something anywhere from mild confusion to utter and immediate panic, because as I have said many times, if Adar destroys Eregion before the rings are forged, Sauron's plan cannot succeed. So, did Sauron want Adar to attack Eregion? I have no idea. Sorry if that sounds like a cop-out, but I have nothing to work with. Sauron's expression in this scene suggests yes, but because we have no idea how Adar worked out that Halbrand is Sauron, it should appear to Sauron that this has come out of nowhere. The show appears to imply that this was part of some kind of master plan where breadcrumbs were laid that were then promptly followed into a trap. But Rings of Power did not present any breadcrumbs. Everything happened off-screen. I think Sauron probably did want Adar to attack Eregion, but why he wanted this and how he maneuvered Adar into doing so are questions I can't answer, which means this part of his plan is utter fucking nonsense. Step 12. Sauron asks King Durin for more mithril, but is refused. He also does not warn the dwarves of the Balrog. This requires both that Sauron needs mithril, and also that he doesn't need mithril, or in other words, this makes absolutely no sense. That he went to Khazad-dûm means that he evidently hadn't come up with his plan to trick Celebrimbor with goo, which means that was Plan B. Plan A was to get mithril. But as soon as the king says no, he immediately decides, oh okay, goo it is then, but the difference between mithril and goo is something we are never told, which means we can't work out how much sense it makes for him to hide the Balrog from the dwarves. The best I can do is say that given that the mithril was Plan A, and given that Sauron decides to scrap Plan A entirely at the first hurdle, and the reason why there is even a hurdle to begin with is because Sauron gave the dwarves evil rings that turned the bearer into a gold-addicted moron within a few hours, Sauron's actions here are entirely incomprehensible. Step 13. Sauron traps Celebrimbor inside a temporal prison. He hands Celebrimbor a jar of goo, disguised as mithril, and convinces Celebrimbor to return to the forge. This makes sense, although the revelation that Sauron can manipulate time in the way that he does here makes his actions elsewhere in seasons 1 and 2 totally incoherent. The writers give Sauron this incredible power and then have him use it in a relatively mundane way. So whilst it makes sense that he would do this, this pokes a whole load of holes elsewhere in his plan, which means that this stage damages the plan as a whole. Oh, and a couple of people seemed confused by my claim in Part 7 that Sauron had slowed down time for Celebrimbor, so I'll quickly clarify why I believe this to be the case. It may well be that this is not what the writers intended, but this is absolutely what is implied by the events of that episode, because Celebrimbor believed that he had been in the tower for weeks. He then crafted the rings, and he said that it would probably take a few more days to finish them. If this was simply an illusion, then there is no way that he could have crafted the rings in this perceived time frame, unless Adar was catapulting the city for weeks and the elves just didn't do anything about it. Therefore, this was not just an illusion taking place within Celebrimbor's mind. This was time being stretched so as to allow Celebrimbor to craft the rings on his own before the orcs overrun the city. I do consider it slightly less absurd to say that Sauron is capable of insane magical bullshit, but also forgets that he is capable of insane magical bullshit, than it is to say that the elves let themselves get bombarded for weeks, and that the Linden army did not arrive during that time. And so that is why I have concluded, based on what the show has told us, that Sauron can slow down time. Step 14. Sauron prepares the elves for the upcoming attack. The reason why he does this is twofold. He needs to defend Eregion until the rings are finished, and he wants to further alienate Celebrimbor from his people. Him needing to defend Eregion at all is only necessary because he somehow lured Adar to Eregion for unknown reasons and by unspecified means, but him assuming the role of the competent leader does only benefit him, and it is something that he would do given the circumstances. Step 15. Sauron accidentally reveals flaws in his temporal prison, and Celebrimbor realizes what is going on. Sauron then lifts the illusion entirely, reveals what he did with the Mithril, and reveals his identity. This comes about entirely because Sauron is incompetent and has no idea how to use the power the writers have given him. He also, yet again, reveals his identity when he does not need to, thereby making it harder for him to achieve his goal, which means he is directly acting against his own self-interest. Step 16. Sauron allows Celebrimbor to leave before gaslighting him further on the walls, and having Celebrimbor throw Medania to her death. He then offers to save Eregion if Celebrimbor finishes the rings. Letting Celebrimbor leave the forge is a no-win situation. Yes, it does allow Sauron to further torment Celebrimbor, but he did not need to do this. And he absolutely could have physically or magically prevented Celebrimbor from leaving, and made any number of threats to make him continue his work. Allowing Celebrimbor to leave only introduces other variables, such as Celebrimbor getting catapulted the moment he walks out of the door, which means this is an insane risk that Sauron takes for absolutely no reason. Step 17. Sauron leaves Celebrimbor alone in the forge, and he escapes. Sauron obviously did not want this to happen, and the only reason it does happen is because Sauron wandered off to do something else off-screen. Given that the rings for men are of critical importance to him, there is no reason I can think of for why Sauron would leave Celebrimbor unattended for any length of time, which means, yet again, that he inexplicably acted against his own self-interest. Step 18. When Celebrimbor returns to the forge, Sauron mind controls the guards to kill themselves. He later tortures Celebrimbor to learn the location of the rings, resulting in Celebrimbor's death. Killing the guards makes sense, but as with his time-bending ability, the fact that he can do this opens up a multitude of questions elsewhere in the story. His torture method is remarkably mundane given Sauron's otherworldly nature, and him allowing himself to be provoked by Celebrimbor into killing him too early is something that he obviously did not want to do, which means he was unable to control himself for reasons that the show does not adequately explain. Step 19. Sauron convinces Glug and the other orcs to assassinate Adar, and he assumes command of the orcs. This was almost certainly him being opportunistic, but it is also incredibly lucky, because he just so happens to bump into the orc who had been questioning Adar's leadership for the last couple of episodes, and Sauron is able to leverage Glug's wavering conviction to kill Adar. Convincing Glug was not necessary, however, as Sauron could have just killed Adar without help from the orcs, but the way this happens is still extremely lucky. And finally, step 20. Sauron fights Galadriel for the rings. He recovers the rings for men, but Galadriel escapes with her elven ring. This makes absolutely no sense, because even though he doesn't want to kill her, he can incapacitate her as seen in Season 1. Which means Sauron could have won and taken the rings for men and her elven ring, but he chose not to. Which means, in total, of the 20 steps to Sauron's plan, 2 of them are instances of Sauron being opportunistic and winging it. 4 of them are deliberate or pre-planned moves that make sense given his objective. 6 of them are him being obscenely lucky in a way that cannot possibly have been planned or accounted for, and 8 of them are incomprehensible nonsense where he either draws on information that he cannot have, directly acts against his own self-interest, or does things for reasons that are entirely unexplained. Back in Eregion, the orcs have gathered up both Gilgapilloch and Elrond, which means both of them survived the final moments of Episode 7. Both of them should be fucking dead, but at least with Gilgadooby we have some wiggle room because he spent most of the fight off screen, and so we don't actually know what happened to him. In the case of Elrond, Adar throttled him and threw him to the ground before we ended on a dramatic cliffhanger, as of course is tradition, and the fact that he is alive now means that Adar chose not to kill him, despite him being the commander of the opposing army, and the orcs also decided not to kill him, even though Adar had moments earlier ordered the orcs to kill them all. Anyway, an orc prepares to burn a pile of what he believes to be garbage, presumably, before Elrond pleads with him not to, stating that this is the full record of Celebrimbor's work. The orc says, "Oh, okay," and then he doesn't burn the books, which I guess that's what Elrond was expecting. The orc obviously tortures them because you just told him not to do it. There is a brief scuffle. We see that Arondir is somehow also alive, despite him having been run through with a sword, and despite the fact that the orcs have no reason to spare him now, given that Arondir is not one of the elven leaders. I have no idea what to think about Arondir just kind of being totally fine in this episode, because it doesn't actually lead to anything. Yes, the show has absolutely lied to us and played up this big dramatic, oh no, one of the main characters is dead moment, only to have him inexplicably be totally fine the next time we see him. But Arondir is entirely irrelevant to the plot in this episode. He got better off-screen through unspecified means, and as soon as he does something plot relevant, then this will become a problem, but for now, he is just alive and it doesn't matter. Also, at this point, I have no idea how many elves are left in Middle-earth. We have the population of Lindon minus its army, because that appears to be gone now, plus Elrond, Gil-go-Away, Galadriel, and Arondir. And I think that's about it. Anyway.
Lord Sauron wanted to lead us unharmed!
This is infuriating, because the entire reason why the orc army came here was to kill Sauron. And now they are all of the understanding that actually they are working for Sauron. The writers have done this repeatedly in Season 2. They have used one single character to represent the will of the many, and when this one character changes their mind about something, we are expected to believe that the entire population of X has also changed their minds. This is incredibly lazy writing, and it happens with Na'vi, Mirdania, and now Glug. The writers not only inverted Glug's values and personality, but they also inverted the objective of the entire orc army. Okay, Arondir got better. Elrond thinks the orcs can be reasoned with, and Gil-galad is just unbearably boring. Now back to the thrilling duel between Fivehead and the Genocide engine. Sauron lands another small wound on Galadriel's shoulder. He does some bullshit with the Crown of Morgoth, and says surely she must understand that in order to find the light, you must first touch the darkness. Sauron's objective here is to convince Galadriel to hand over the rings, because he claims not to want to fight her. However, this is something Sauron might say if he was mocking her, because he is reminding her of her brother Finrod, whom Sauron killed. And the reason he knows about this line of dialogue is because he entered her mind in Season 1. Sauron is therefore perverting a memory Galadriel has of her brother, and he is seemingly doing so in a confounding attempt to convince her that she should stop fighting. Galadriel then says that they are nothing alike, and she lands her first effective hit on him. Right when she is about to finish her opponent, however, he shapeshifts back into Halbrand, which means we can throw out what I said about Sauron controlling the rings back in Part 4. The visions Galadriel had were seemingly visions of the future, even of events that she would not personally witness. So, Sauron turns back into Halbrand, and Galadriel's special place starts feeling all fuzzy again. He tells her that if he felt he could hold on to the feeling of fighting at her side, ... referencing the discussion he had with Galadriel in episode 6 of season 1. But this doesn't work, even though it kinda does for a sec, because
damn, this guy might be Satan, but also he's hot, so I might sit on his face instead of killing him.
Sauron then realizes that the key to Galadriel's heart is herself.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are 2 of them.
She can love no one other than herself. She is doomed to tickle her bean until the end of her days. Because Galadriel is the smartest person Galadriel has ever met. She is the only person she will listen to, and Sauron, having spelunked around inside her mind, knows all of her secrets. Sauron continues, "They could no longer distinguish me from the evil I was fighting," which is a reference to episode 5 of season 1, where Galadriel claimed that her company, her friend, and her High King all conspired against her because they believed that she was indistinguishable from Sauron. Then Sauron realizes, actually, Galadriel has seemingly developed a vague desire to save lives if someone asks her to do it, so he turns into Celebrimbor and says,
"They're not the seeds you planted."
This is a callback to episode 2 of season 2, the ring vision with the fucking seed metaphor. So, if we connect the dialogue that Sauron delivers whilst in these various forms, he is saying to Galadriel that she herself planted the seeds that allowed Sauron to succeed, which both we and Galadriel already knew. We already knew this at the end of season 1, and so why we are retreading this old ground, I can't answer. The last time these two characters spoke to each other was at the end of season 1, and here they are just having the same conversation again. My guess is that the writers wanted to pull a similar move to the one they pulled at the end of season 1, but to combine it with a fight scene to make it more dramatic, which also necessitated that Sauron forget that he can incapacitate Galadriel at any moment. Sauron then stomps on the rock, which makes them both fall off. Galadriel reaches for her sword, but Sauron knocks it away. He then, rather confusingly, turns back into Anatar, even though turning back into Halbrand would have been far more effective given his objective. Sauron says that he knows her mind, and that the door is still open. The offer to rule the galaxy together as king and still stands. Galadriel then adheres to rule number 5 and says exactly what she is thinking.
The door is shut.
Before booting Sauron in the face and attacking him once more. In an embarrassing display of angsty teenage melodrama, Sauron starts reeing because the chick he fancies just turned him down. Galadriel lands a hit on his face, but the fight ends when Sauron stabs her with the crown of Morgoth. He tells her that he would have placed a crown upon her head, and that he would have made sure all of Middle-earth knelt before her. Once again, repeating the exact same narrative beat that we had in season 1, where Sauron for some reason thought Galadriel was power-hungry and she turned him down. Galadriel replies that the Free Peoples will always resist him. Victorious, Sauron takes the rings for men, but instead of doing the exact thing that would help him achieve his objective, rather than taking the elven ring from Galadriel, Sauron continues to get in his own way, and he psychically tells Galadriel to give him the ring. She appears to comply, indicating that as far as Sauron is aware, this is mind control. The subversion here is that Galadriel is not actually being mind controlled, she is just acting as though she is, which means Sauron would absolutely know at this— I really don't know why I expected this to make sense. Then she asks,
"You wish to heal Middle-earth?"
And she finishes with the incredible line,
"Heal yourself."
No!
She tells this clingy and melodramatic simp,
"You need to go home and clean your room, eh?"
Then Galadriel throws herself and the ring off the cliff. We then see the full height of the cliff from a distance, which tells us how far Galadriel has fallen, which tells us that this woman is fucking dead. Okay, Sauron is pathetic. Forgets his magic powers. Re with an accent. Let's do that. I don't know. I don't know how that goes. And he is also terrible at convincing people. Galadriel won't kill Satan if he is hot. And is dead. Then a horn bellows, and the dwarven army is now here suddenly. They aren't arriving, they are, like, properly here, as in they are inside of Eregion pelting the orcs with crossbows. Because the majority of people who enjoy Rings of Power don't actually watch or understand the show, the writers needed to throw in a line to make sure that they understand what is happening. And the line they throw in is— I don't know what this face means. Is he thrilled that they have been rescued? Is he mocking his orc captor like, oh man, you're in deep shit now? Is he melancholic that whilst, yes, Elrond was right, the dwarves have arrived too late to save the city? None of the above, it seems. He just goes, dwarves, to tell the viewers who are doom-scrolling on social media what is going on. Arondir is now totally mobile, despite having a hole in his chest. Elrond mistakes a dwarf for Durin, and it turns out to be Na'vi, who informs Elrond that Durin is in mourning. This means that after the King Zerg rushed the Balrog, the others kind of turned around and climbed back up the mountain, and the Balrog was like, okay, bye. And this also tells us that Durin presumably sent out this army as soon as the situation with his father was resolved, which helps us to work out timeframes, which I will do in the autopsy. After taking a little tumble off the cliff, Galadriel is totally fine because of course she is. Gilgamesh realizes that her spirit has been injured by the Crown of Morgoth, and he explains this to the camera because he is of course a character in a TV show. Gilgabandage then uses his ring to heal her, which doesn't work. The reason this doesn't work is because the writers need Elrond to be convinced to put the ring on that he had been so adamantly against for the entire season, which he does, and we then cut away before we see what happens. This whole scenario has been contrived specifically so as to force Elrond to compromise on his values, to put on the ring that he deemed to be evil so as to save his friend and possibly lover. The problem is that Elrond changed his mind about this ring at the end of episode 4, and so why he has continued to show unwillingness to personally wear the ring, I'm afraid I just can't explain. The nature of this healing is indeed magical, but the injury they are trying to heal is specifically the damage to Galadriel's spirit caused by the evil nature of the Crown of Morgoth. They completely ignore the mundane wound, and they only mention the spooky magic wound. They do not mention, oh fuck, her skull is in piece, oh shit, her spine is at a right angle, oh, her internal organs have all combined into one giant organ because this idiot just jumped off a fucking cliff. So what am I meant to conclude from this? Elves can't die. Physics do not apply to them. If only we had another reference for an elf falling from a height. Oh snap, yes we do. Medania fell off the battlements at Eregion, and although this is not what killed her, she was very clearly not in a good way after the fall. Galadriel appears to have fallen at least 10 times that distance, and so I can therefore only conclude, based on the information Rings of Power has given me, that Galadriel is not only volcano-proof, she is also gravity-proof. Okay, Gil-galad. Dwarves. Elrond compromises on his values, even though his values have already changed, and Galadriel got better. Anyway, having now character assassinated Glug by making him instantly become an acolyte of Sauron who allies himself with Sauron despite knowing who Sauron is, Glug tells Sauron that they are overwhelmed, and Sauron stabs Glug in the neck.
He's dead.
Because Sauron is evil. Which means the entire point of Glug was to inexplicably turn on Adar in favor of Sauron, and to then immediately die when Sauron gets a little angry. The character of Glug seemingly existed entirely so that we know that Sauron is evil. What would have been far better would have been to have Glug turn on Adar, which is clearly what they were building towards, but then for Glug to replace Adar himself and be like, guys, okay, stop ungabungering the city, we can go home now, and then for Sauron to try and take control of the orcs, at which point Glug and the orcs have something to fight against. Instead, Glug is like, I'll team up with this guy who a few days ago I was terrified by the mere mention of, and then whoops, oh, I guess he was evil, who could have possibly seen that coming? The only thing this episode was missing on the emotional manipulation front was a shot of Glugwife and Glugling sat at the dinner table, as the camera slowly pans out showing an empty chair with Glug's name on it. A badly written "Welcome back, Dad" card sat on the table. And honestly, that is basically the end of the episode, but we actually have about 20 more minutes of bullshit still to get through. Okay, Sauron is really evil if you didn't notice by now. And Glug, whoops. Cut back to Rune in the ruins of the Stor's village. This is the second village Nori has gotten burned to the ground. She could have left to find not Gandalf herself, having a vague idea of where he might be, but she instead decided, actually no, let's stay and fight against an evil wizard. Nori then tearfully says that they have to fix the village, perhaps indicating that she knows that she caused this to happen. Because the writer's sole concern appears to be reminding people of something else, Poppy begins a monologue, because this is something Sam did in The Two Towers. Poppy says that after her family got eaten by bees, she had a chat with Sadok, who told her that some things can't be fixed no matter how hard we fight. No matter how much it hurts, no matter how much our hearts yearn to put them back together, because this world is so much bigger than any of us, and sometimes the winds blowing against us are just too strong. At those times, we've just got to accept it. What's broke is broke and won't fix, and all anybody can do is try and build something new. During this monologue, we see the dwarves of Khazad-dûm mourning their king. We see the elves leaving Eregion as it burns to the ground. We see Theo realizing that actually he isn't in charge of jack shit, and we see Estrid and Hagen holding hands, while she wistfully stares at the departing Númenórean ship and Isildur stares back. Miriel faces judgment for teaming up with Sauron, maybe. Elendil rides away from the city as seen in his Palantir vision, and Sauron holds Feanor's hammer. The point of this monologue is to convey that sometimes when something is gone, you can't get it back. You can only build something new. And the visuals, much like in The Two Towers, are clearly an attempt to tie the various narratives in Season 2 of Rings of Power into some kind of coherent thematic vision. So, how applicable are these words to each of these visuals? It is honestly a pretty even split between, yeah, okay, no, what the hell are you talking about, and wait, what does that have to do with anything? Firstly, the bits that make sense. This monologue is relating specifically to something Sadok told Poppy after her family died. Poppy obviously is not a necromancer, and so the best thing she can do is build new relationships and find a new family, which is something that makes sense. Additionally, much like Poppy, the dwarves are not necromancers and they can't get King Durin back. They can only build something new in the form of Prince Durin taking his place. Eregion might technically be able to get rebuilt in some form, but the Eregion that was, along with all of Celebrimbor's research, is lost entirely. And finally, Sauron preparing to build something new is in line with his apparent objective throughout Season 2, although this only approximately fits because the only thing he has lost is Galadriel and her ring, neither of which were necessary for his evil plan and were simply nice to have. Why Sauron has Feanor's hammer, I have no idea, but I guess he hid the hammer inside his prison wallet because he knew the camera was going to be pointing at him when Poppy gives a voiceover about building something new. Which means 4 of the 10 references here make an amount of sense. Now, on to the remaining 6. Regarding the recent destruction of the Store's village, this does not make sense at all. They can absolutely fix the village, and if they truly wanted to, then they would do so. I have questions relating to how exactly this village exists in the first place, not to mention why the Stores decided willingly to build such a village in the middle of the desert, but given the sentimentality they clearly have for their home, and given that they already built it once, they can absolutely build it again. But unfortunately, the writers won't let them. Fortunately, however, the writers did establish the prophesized Holy Land known as the Shire earlier in the season, which no doubt is where this will lead to. Next up, the idea that both Miriel and Elendil are just going to stop trying to fix Númenor is insane. Elendil going off into the woods to build something new is absurd because this isn't what he is doing, unless we are expected to believe that he does not have any intention of returning to the city. Miriel accepting her trial and presumably going down as a martyr is arguably an example of a character accepting that some things are lost, but this is absolutely not her trying to build something new. Now the narratives that are totally unrelated to this idea. Theo standing around like, I thought I was important, why does no one care that I am Theo, son of Bronwyn, has nothing to do with either accepting that some things are lost or building something new. Captain Cuck continuing his relationship with his whore as she longs for the beef of someone else's loins is extremely funny on the face of it, but again has nothing to do with accepting a loss or building something new. Yes, we could say that she has lost Isildur, but she is not building something new with Hagen. She was already with Hagen, and if anything, her leaving Hagen for Isildur would have been her building something new. Isildur returning to Númenor does, again, mean that he has lost Estrid, but we have zero indication for what Isildur is going to do when he arrives in Númenor, which means this doesn't work either. Now, because we are at the end of a season of Rings of Power, we need to have a drawn-out sequence of characters no one cares about saying goodbye to not Gandalf, complete with wink-wink, nudge-nudge references to other Middle-earth properties. Poppy hugs him and says,
"Don't be a stranger now."
This one I don't mind because this of course has 2 meanings. She wants to see him again, and she is referencing the fact that she has only known him until this point as the stranger. This is a cute little goodbye moment that is 1 degree more interesting and complex than simply saying goodbye. Then Simple Jack says,
"Thank you kindly, Grandel."
Gundabale is also seemingly remarkably well-tempered, given that she was introduced as quite literally the exact opposite of well-tempered. and her home that she deeply values has just been destroyed because Rasputin was looking for these 3 outsiders. She should be fucking furious with them, inconsolable, but she instead also says,
"My grand elf."
I hate this, because it is very clear that the writers think that this is really clever writing. Like, oh, okay, well, just make an unjustifiable mouth noise and have this sound vaguely like the name of the character that everyone has known is his real name for over an entire fucking season at this point. Simple Jack does not know not Gandalf as the Grand Elf. Gundabale sarcastically referred to him as a great big Grand Elf because Nori described him as being like an elf but bigger. Simple Jack has seemingly been spending his time with Poppy, who has never referred to not Gandalf as Grand Elf, and honestly, had he come out and said, "Thank you, Fredegard, see you later," then this would have made more sense. Poppy knows that not Gandalf doesn't really have a name, which would absolutely have come up in conversation with Simple Jack, which means that Simple Jack has decided that, well, because this guy doesn't have a name, and because Gundabale observed that he was a large elf, I am going to name him Large Elf. Anyway, Poppy, Simple Jack, Gundabale, and the other stores leave the set, and we will inevitably pick up with them again in Season 3, where they are given some bullshit to deal with on their way to the Shire. Nori tells not Gandalf that the stores have never left their home before, and that because this is their first migration, they had no idea what to bring. Because Nori is a bitch, she didn't help them. She just says, well, they didn't seem to have a clue what they were doing, so fuck them, right? Also, are the stores idiots? I mean, I know that some of them literally are, but are they all fucking morons? What do you bring on a migration? Let me think. How about food, water, and clothing? Nori says that if she had her way, she'd walk around with not Gandalf forever, but she thinks it is time they parted ways. She has to lead the stores to the Holy Land, and he must save the world. They say goodbye, and I still don't care. After Nori leaves, not Gandalf finds a stick that he likes, and great, well done, he has proven himself worthy. He then returns to Tombaloid like, oh boy, I've worked it out. When you said I should let my friends die, that was a test, wasn't it? You aren't actually a sarcastic, condescending, and uncaring prick, are you? You were just trying to push my buttons and see if I was worthy of saving the world. Because Rings of Power is Rings of Power, when something happens, the writers will either just not explain it, or they will over-explain it to make sure the target audience understands what just happened.
I was meant to choose friendship over power.
Mission accomplished.
Tombaloid tells not Gandalf that the staff chooses the wizard, as does the name, even though not Gandalf appears to have chosen the staff and he is about to choose his name.
Gandalf.
I suppose you think that was terribly clever.
If only you hadn't spent the last 16 fucking hours being like,
hey look, he's probably Gandalf, or is he, tee-hee?
Then Tombaloid is like, well done on your quest, now let's sing a song about me. And they start singing a song about Tombaloid for some reason, and I'm skipping the song because I don't care. Meanwhile, Rasputin is like, nah, I'll get you next time. Okay, Gundabale is an idiot. Tombaloid is an egomaniac. Nori is now Moses, and not Gandalf is now Gandalf. Back in Khazad-dûm, Na'vi tells Durin and Disa that Eregion has fallen, making me wonder what good the Dwarven army was, and also making me wonder what Durin's reaction to this revelation will be. Unfortunately, we will have to wait until Season 3 to see how the writers will fuck this up. Durin is informed that Elrond has led the survivors to a valley north of Khazad-dûm. This valley is going to be referred to in Season 3 as kind of rivery, and also it's a place where the people dwell there. So you could almost say it's like a river dwell. Ho ho ho, these writers are so fucking clever, aren't they? Durin then says to inform Elrond that Khazad-dûm is ready to offer aid once more. But Disa tells him that they have troubles of their own, which is the understatement of the fucking century because there is a Balrog knocking on your door, but also not really, because none of you are acting like your home is about to be destroyed.
The Lords of the Blue Mountains paid him vast tribute. They're demanding to collect.
What the fuck are you talking about? You aren't even talking about the Balrog. Are we just going to forget that? Like, yeah, he's down there, but, we have bigger problems. Like the Dwarf Lords are arguing over how much gold they're paying us or something. So the other Dwarven kingdoms have already paid King Durin vast tributes, and they are demanding to collect the rings. This is meant to serve as a dramatic hook for Season 3. But it has an easy solution. Refund them. The only reason the other kingdoms would not accept this is if they are all starving because Evil Mountain or whatever, but if they have been hit similarly to Khazad-dûm, then how can they possibly have mined half of their mines to pay for the rings? If you are Durin, you absolutely, under no circumstances, distribute those rings, because they are obviously evil. and Durin and Disa appear to be in control of them, at least for now. Na'vi then cliffhangers all over the place.
Rumours fly. You are not your father's preferred heir. Some of the other dwarf lords are advancing claims. Your brother seems to be gathering support.
Durin's brother, who has been mentioned once in the last 16 hours, has been gathering support because...
Stay tuned for season 3, you dick muppets!
Okay, Disa thinks political drama is more of a pressing concern than a gigantic fire demon living in the floor. Now for our final scene. We are here in the dwell that is near a river, and the orcs can't get them because they have deflector shields or some bullshit. Gilgalol then cracks a joke.
I've never known you to be such peaceable company. I believe I was growing accustomed to it.
Whilst I question Gilgalamau cracking sarcastic jokes given the fact that they have just suffered a catastrophic defeat, there is a hint of truth to this joke. This is the rare occasion in which Galadriel is not insufferable, because she is unconscious. Elrond then explains that this is a sanctuary protected by the Elven Rings. What this means and how this works is unexplained, but I guess it has a big magic dome over the top of it, which means Sauron and the orcs can't find them, because magical bullshit. Elrond gives her the ring back, and she cooms once more. Arondir is like, hey, I'm also alive, inexplicably, wanna be friends? And then we hear that the other elves are waiting for a decision from the High King. Sauron's armies are roaming across Eriador. All Middle-earth is now within his reach, even Lindon. We must decide whether to attack and bring the fight to him, or fall back and prepare defenses.
The sword or the shield?
Fuck you!
Elrond clarifies that many of Eregion's bravest fell, and that the few survivors are broken. My understanding was that basically the entirety of the Lindon army was wiped out, and basically every elf in Eregion was killed in the attack, which means the strength of the elves in Middle-earth has gone down by at least 50% in the last few days. We have to assume that the army from Lindon consisted of pretty much every available soldier, because the only reason Gilgajoke would hide anything back would be as a final line of defense in case the worst should happen, which, as it turns out, has happened. This should mean that Lindon essentially does not have an army at this point. Thousands of people are dead. This is the worst thing that has happened to the elves since the war against Morgoth. But no time for that now. Arondir asks Galadriel what to do. Gilgortistic is like, oh fuck, she's going to speak again, isn't she? Galadriel then says,
well, what we need to do is go on a murderous rampage throughout Middle-earth to find Sauron so that I can lick whipped cream out of his asshole.
Actually, no, sorry, I don't know where I got that idea from. She says that she would remember the counsel of Celebrimbor. It is not strength that overcomes darkness, but light. Which is a nice thought, but it doesn't quite work if Sauron literally has thousands of orcs pillaging Middle-earth. She is suggesting that instead of being really, really strong, they must be really, really bright. Then the sun shines and the elves are like, whoa, sun! I mean, the elves were apparently waiting for the High King to make a decision for what they should do next. Do they attack or defend? And then Galadriel says, let's be really, really bright. And then Gilgamazing gets his sword out and the elves who heard none of the previous conversation were like, yay, sword! And for the final time in season 2, we cut to the credits. That was a slog. Possibly more than any other episode in the entire series. Episode 8 of Season 2 is an incomprehensible mess built upon a foundation of soggy porridge. King Durin suddenly got better just in time to die for no reason. Adar and Glug both have their character traits inverted for dramatic effect. Galadriel's climactic battle against her nemesis was extremely funny for all the wrong reasons. All of the extraneous side plots that needed resolving exemplify how unfocused this season is, because we spent inordinate amounts of time hopping around the world to give resolutions to characters that we haven't seen in the past 4 hours. The Numenor stuff in Season 2 could have all been contained within 1 episode. The rune stuff is unbearably boring and nonsensical, and exists because, oh my fucking god, look, it's Gandalf. The Pelargir stuff, I guess, has justification for existing. It's just that the only thing that happened in Pelargir was the side quest to rescue the horse that turned into a side quest to rescue an idiot. Celebrimbor was the highlight of this episode, and this season, and by that I mean the actor. Charles Edwards has carried this season on his shoulders, and he did an excellent job with what he was given to work with. Prior to starting my videos on Season 2, I was expecting that Season 2 would probably be bad, but it would potentially be a slight upgrade over Season 1. Season 1 had the disadvantage of needing to establish the world, the characters, and the history, some of which it did poorly, and some of which it just didn't do. Whereas Season 2 could have theoretically hit the ground running and taken these poorly established characters in their incomprehensible world with either non-existent or contradictory history, and at the very least, done something entertaining. What we got is barely worthy of praise in any form. There were the occasional scenes or character beats in Season 1 that functioned well. In Season 2, we have had maybe one scene that was okay. So in conclusion, the whole point of these videos is not to complain about a thing that I don't like. It is to thoroughly demonstrate all of the ways in which Rings of Power is broken. If you like it, great, good for you. That doesn't mean the show is good. And as has hopefully been demonstrated thoroughly, almost every character, almost every line of dialogue, almost every plot beat, and almost every payoff is broken in some way. Rings of Power isn't bad because it is disrespectful to Tolkien. It isn't bad because I don't like it, and it isn't bad because it isn't as good as the Peter Jackson movies. Rings of Power is bad because almost everything in the show is non-functional. Season 2 is absolutely worse than Season 1, and it is going to take a little while to explain why, but that is where the final autopsy comes in. As you may be aware, I like to conclude my series with a final autopsy video, which will cover overall character arcs, how the narrative is constructed, timelines, logical inconsistencies, and a whole lot more. The final autopsy video is also my opportunity to make any corrections from these episodic videos, so if you think that I got something wrong, then please tell me, because I will be going through comments to have a look in case there is anything that I need to clarify or retract when I make my final autopsy video. That video is going to be long, and it will be coming soon. However, making these 8 episodic videos over the last few weeks has been more work than I have ever done in such a short amount of time, and so I am going to be taking most, if not all, of November off. Before I put my feet up and take a well-earned rest, I want to quickly give a couple of channel updates. The next video to be released will be Arcane Part 3, which will be released on the 25th of October. The next video after that will likely be the autopsy for Season 2 of Rings of Power, and after that I will begin working on the extended versus theatrical video for The Return of the King. After that, I have a few ideas, but I am very much open to suggestions. Regarding streaming, I will be doing a live tier list ranking for the characters in Rings of Power Season 2, similar to what I did for The Hobbit. This will likely be sometime in December at the earliest, but I will make sure that I schedule this on the YouTube dashboard so that you guys know well in advance when the stream is going to happen, so make sure that you are subscribed and have enabled notifications if you want to take part in that stream. There are also a handful of video games released very recently that I have been unable to play or stream because I have been working on these videos. And so you can expect streams of God of War Ragnarok, Space Marine 2, and Frostpunk 2 in the near future. As for which one I will stream first, I will leave that up to a channel poll. But with that, as always, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have enjoyed watching as much as I have enjoyed making, and I will see you in my next video.